This is the Impunity Observer live stream. Fergus Hodgson, your host, and joined by my editor-at-large, Stephen Hecht. Go to impunityobserver.com for all our content. Follow us on Twitter at ObserveImpunity. And please subscribe to our newsletter. We are a geopolitical intelligence service focusing on the rule of law and economic development at the nexus of Latin America and Anglo-America. And I'm in Honduras. Steve is in Guatemala. It's our privilege to be with you. Okay, we are live now. This is the Impunity Observer live stream. Fergus Hodgson, your host, Steve Hecht, our editor-at-large, with me. Thanks for tuning in. We are a geopolitical intelligence service, and you'll find us at impunityobserver.com. It's our privilege to be with you. And I'm in Honduras. Steve is in Guatemala City. Steve, of course, the big news this week, or this month, since the show is monthly, is the election, the initial round of elections in Guatemala City. Now, do you have some initial comments on those before we get into the articles you've been writing over the last month?
Well, the election is a bit controversial. There are a lot of interests at play. It hasn't been handled particularly well. People are saying that it's a well-run election as far as election day is concerned. And there are other people that are saying that there are anomalies with various statistics of things that just simply don't make sense and don't square. For instance, there's a candidate who showed up in polls, but he ended up taking second place, and there was nothing to indicate in any polls. Now, of course, we all know that polls here are not reliable and that they're manipulated for political agendas. But when you take a whole range of them, and in that whole range of them, it has somebody way down in the pack that all of a sudden comes in second, that raises questions as to what really happened. Now, there are a lot of other things that you have to look at if you want to decide that an election was properly run, and the main point of this election that was bad right from the beginning was that in 2016, the United States State Department, led by then Ambassador Todd Robinson, abused power and he used the UNE party as a figurehead to change Guatemala's electoral law. And they shortened the time period. They removed money from it. They created a lot of arbitrary criteria, such as campaign propaganda before it was allowed, which infringes upon freedom of speech. And they set this up so that their people who controlled the electoral authority and the court of last resort, the constitutional court, could control the election. So they could help their candidates, they could limit opposition candidates, and they could also eliminate them from participation. There were some legal challenges to that filed last year, and the Constitutional Court corruptly rejected those challenges, a 4-1 vote. And so the government in power wanted to keep that law. And I don't know what conclusion you could draw other than that they had a political agenda. And, there are a lot of accusations of all kinds of things. But, when you begin from that point of view, that's bad. And of course, the people who complain the loudest are the ones who benefited from that corruption 4 years ago, which was instituted by this U.S. State Department. And so for State Department and for radical collectivists in general, what's good for thee is not necessarily good for me. I can do anything and you can do nothing. And so all of the noise that you hear is just that. It's a bunch of partisan hypocrisy. But if you really want to look underneath it, you have to look at many different aspects, and you have to start with the involvement of the State Department 4 years ago that has not been corrected.
Yeah, Steve, so much to say about this. The So we actually published an article this morning. If people want to read impunityobserver.com, it is what the New York Times got spectacularly wrong about Guatemala. And if you go onto any of the English websites, whether it's The Guardian or, like I said, the New York Times or Associated Press, you get such a contorted version of what's happening in Guatemala, as though there's some kind of overthrow of democracy that has gone on. And Nick Versi, who wrote the article this morning, just said that the irony is that the actual two leftist candidates won. So all this leftist complaining proved to be absolutely false. Now,
well, that's what. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, and you're saying at the same time, because of the informality of the Guatemalan economy, getting accurate surveys is very difficult, or has proved difficult in the past. Correct?
Yeah, that's true. But my comment about what you just said is that you see a contradiction there, but for them there is no contradiction. There's never a contradiction for them. They don't have a double standard. They only have one standard, and it's called win. It's called the ends justify the means. The New York Times has never been a journalistic organization. It's a political action committee. I mean, I watched it in the 80s, the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, when Guatemalan armed conflict was at its height. And the New York Times wrote guerrilla propaganda. It's that simple. And, this goes back a long time. The New York Times had a Moscow correspondent in the late 20s, early 30s, 1900s, we're talking about, Walter Duranty. And this guy got Pulitzer Prize, I think, in 1932. And he was he promoted Joseph Stalin. He hid the Ukraine famine from his readers and was completely supportive of Stalin. And this is the New York Times. So they have a century-old tradition of yellow journalism. These people are absolutely not to be trusted. And probably what happened there, when I read that article, my initial reaction, and there were others like it, because, the international collectivists, the radical collectivists, are organized on an international level. And so they don't just put out one thing. They put them in several places, and sometimes in a lot of places. And when I saw this, I said, aha, that means they're expecting their candidates to lose, and they're getting ready to attack when they win. Well, maybe that was even worse than that, but let's put it this way. Their candidates won, and they're not going to back off of their accusations because, like Saul Alinsky said in 1971 in Rules for Radicals, when the election is fixed so that our candidate wins, then it's a free election. That's how the New York Times thinks.
Yeah, look, Steve, this just struck me because just as someone who was following the result, I went through the English language sources. And let me read one example from the UK Guardian. Guatemala's presidential election has thrown up a major surprise with the centrist Bernardo Arevalo claiming a spot in the second round amid growing anger over political corruption and the erosion of democracy in Central America's most populous nation. Okay, when you read a news story, you assume it's news, that it's just a simple objective observation of what's happening. Growing anger over political corruption and the erosion of democracy? Does anyone in Guatemala even think that? I don't know what this guy's talking about.
Yeah, I unfortunately there is some truth to that. I mean, like I said at the beginning, this government, the court, wouldn't declare unconstitutional something that's obviously unconstitutional. As a matter of fact, one magistrate who voted to overturn those articles that the State Department put in wrote a dissent that if you read that dissent, it's absolutely devastating for the other four magistrates. And so, what could you say? Democracy, Guatemala is a democratic country. It's a democratic republic, and it's been making progress, and it grows economically despite all of this stuff. But still, the people are discontent. I mean, you drive in the roads and they don't fix the roads. Where'd the money go? Went to mayors so that they could get the government, the official party's candidates elected. So, people are not unaware of that. So there is some truth. In other words, you could find, just because the Guardian is a far left organization, I could tell you stories about the Guardian that are just sickening in their bias, and and so when you see something from them, you can't automatically dismiss anything anybody says. You have to take everything on its merit or lack of merit. So there is some merit in what they were saying, but the problem is that the people that they support, the agendas that they support, will make everything worse. In other words, they support radical collectivist totalitarians. Those are their people, the ones that they quote, the ones that they slant the news for, the ones that they suppress the truth for. So even if every once in a while the Guardian says something that's true, so what?
Well, the thing is that I think you missed my point a little bit there, Steve, that sure, there's corruption, but that's basically a constant in Guatemala.
Constant in the world.
Yeah. And so they, for some reason, want to promote corruption because they're against, let's say, the incumbent regime. And then,
they're against the incumbent regime, but corruption doesn't bother them. They're the most corrupt people in the country. They're the most corrupt people in the world. Corruption, they use that. That's all. They use it as a pejorative to hurl at their enemies.
That's what I mean. And so then also saying growing anger over erosion of democracy, I just thought, well, the fact is that there are far worse nations when it comes to democracy in Central America. We all know Nicaragua is one, and there are challenges in El Salvador. But it just seems that Guatemala was.
Yeah, I probably confused a little bit two things. It's not so much, people here, some people have that concept, but the masses don't really think in those terms. They're more interested in what's going on. How are the roads? How are their lives? What does things cost? How accessible are things? Stuff like that. So, Guatemala has actually advanced quite a bit. Obviously, it still has its problems, but the people look around and they say, hey, this could be done better. So they're unsatisfied with it. But it's not because they're saying it's erosion of democracy. There's no erosion of democracy because there never was democracy in the first place. I mean, they're trying to build it. They've been trying to build it for a long time. They had a coup in what was it, 1962, I think it was, and had elections in 1968. And then again, they had a coup in 1982. And since then, they've had elections. And you can't say that independent institutions, which is the hallmark of democracy, you want to see erosion of democracy, look at the United States. It has independent institutions. And the fact is that they're losing credibility among the people because they're being weaponized against the current regime's political enemies. So Guatemala is actually better than the United States in that sense. And so it's not really a question of erosion of democracy. It's failure to advance in it, and its failure to provide the kind of things that people would like to see. Now, a lot of times people want to see things that can't happen. That's not likely in Guatemala. People are a little too close to reality here. That's more likely to happen in advanced countries where people want from the government what it cannot possibly deliver. And that always leads to bad results.
Yeah. I mean, Steve, I should point out to people listening that Steve has lived in Guatemala for about 50 years. He has a strong sense for what's going on the ground. And that's exactly what I was meaning too, that the actual Guatemalan people are concerned about the provision of services, the quality of the infrastructure, the rate of crime. They're not, saying that there is rising anger over
No,
the erosion of democracy.
that's for sure. That's not there.
Yeah.
If I made a mistake in that, I want to correct it now.
Yeah. Did the Guardian go out and survey people? I mean, they just said it like it was undisputed fact or whatever. That is just not the case.
Well, for them, fact is defined as whatever they want it to be.
Yeah. Well, so Nick Versi, one of our great contributors, put up a piece. We published a piece from him this morning, and his counter was this. I'm reading for him from this piece. The elections, we were warned, could be the death knell for democracy in Guatemala. None of this turned out to be true.
It might still be, because the two people who won are people who would like to perpetuate themselves in power and end democracy. That's which the Guardian would be a proponent of.
Right. So So basically, the irony is that the actual functioning of election day, as far as we can tell, was relatively smooth. And so Nick says none of this turned out to be true. The news of the death of democracy in Guatemala was premature and ill-informed.
That's true.
Yeah.
Although, as I said, they might be absolutely right, but they'll be celebrating it because it'll be their people running the dictatorship if the Guatemalans aren't able to resist. And by the way, the United States State Department will be working with the winner to try to promote that dictatorship.
We just had a comment from Minor Gutierrez. Thank you for writing a note there, Minor. And his comment is, the election in Guatemala is a fraud. 85% of the people didn't vote for Semilla or UNE. And just to clarify, Semilla and UNE were the two parties that are going into the presidential runoff. And I suspect he's referring to the fact that there are many people who didn't participate, and then there were white votes. Do you want to clarify that, Steve?
Yeah, well, she might be wrong about Semilla. I mean, she might be right about Semilla, but she's wrong about UNE. The UNE has come in first in the first round of the 2015 and 2019 elections. And so hardly anybody didn't think that the UNE for President, Sandra Torres, wouldn't come in first. I mean, she lost in the second round both times. And the Semilla, that came out of nowhere. That's what I was talking about before, that didn't show up in any polls. I mean, it showed up, but with a much smaller percentage that it ended up having. That by itself is a concern. Now, what's really strange is all of the political parties seem to be accepting this as well run. To me, they're anomalies that I'm not going to say with any type of certainty that this, that, or the other thing happened or didn't happen. But I'm saying is that there are things that really don't make much sense, and you wonder why political parties are not asking the government to open the ballot boxes and actually count the papers and make sure that the ballots match the results that were reported in the computer. That's a perfectly legitimate thing, and they should do that. Even though, I mean, the differences are so great that even if you find, there's a mistake in several thousands of votes, it's not going to change the outcome of the election. But people should know. They have a right to know. But unfortunately, the law, which was made by the State Department using the UNE party in 2016, that only political parties can challenge. In other words, no civic organization, no individual can challenge those results and demand that the court order the ballot boxes, the actual boxes where the ballots have been stored, which by law they must, to open those and count them. Now, that's what they should do, but I would be really surprised if they did. There were about 2,000 challenges 4 years ago, and of course, the State Department controlled the Electoral Authority and the courts, and so they didn't want to look at anything. They accepted the result, and it's hard for me to understand how everybody's just going to tranquilly accept that result when you see these differences in statistics. You wonder why some party who does so well in Congress doesn't do well in the presidential ballot, or vice versa. Things like that. You have to take the things that should go together, and if they're not going together, you have to wonder. It doesn't necessarily mean something's wrong, but there is a solution. There is a way to figure it out, and the way to figure it out is to open the ballot boxes.
Yeah, so Steve, though, you didn't refer to the white votes, which may explain the percentage that our listener or watcher...
White vote?
Yeah.
What do they mean by white vote?
If you just none of the above.
Oh, you're talking about void.
Yes. Well, no, votos blancos. My understanding is that people can vote for no one. They can put in a ballot, and they might put lower down tickets, but then not put anyone for a certain position.
Yeah, that's what they call here voided vote, right? That you could just destroy your vote. You can mark it in such a way that it's just a thrown away vote. And I don't know, since I don't vote here, that. I think they actually do vote. I think there's some place for them to say, I vote void. I don't want to vote for anybody.
My understanding is that got a substantial proportion of people.
Oh, it came in first.
Right.
It got more than Sandra Torres. And, that's obviously an expression of discontent. What they're discontent with could be a whole range of things, but certainly for people to do that, it's the same as saying, well, I don't think this makes any difference to me. I reject it. Well, you could interpret it in any way you want, but it's a rejection, however you look at it. And
what about this? Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
People were actually, some people, I'm not sure who it was, but they were promoting, asking people to vote that way. Now, the chances are that those votes were taken from the opponents of the leftist parties. So the chances are that was a leftist ploy to try to help their candidates win. And of course, the people here, a lot of people do understand, but in general, they don't understand, or too few understand, that their enemy, number one enemy, is the State Department. And the State Department is desperate to continue its agenda of conquering Guatemala for radical socialists and to hide the many crimes that it has committed here between 2010 and now, especially between 2016 and 2021, when the State Department controlled Guatemala's justice system. They want to hide it from Guatemalans, but more than that, they want to hide it from their own Congress.
Steve, what about this comment from our viewer who says that the Semilla, this up-and-coming party, or this party that few people knew about, was founded with money from the last government of Alvaro Colon?
Yeah, well, Semilla, the finance minister of Colon was one of the original people in Semilla, and it's a far-left party. And it ran a candidate last time that got a huge number of votes, and for president, and not one person in the Congress. That's the kind of thing I mean about anomalies. That's serious, a serious anomaly. I mean, if you get that many votes for president, people don't really split their vote that much here. So something's wrong. The other thing is that 4 years ago, they tried to run Tel Maldana. Joe Biden sent a tweet to try to help Tel Maldana. And there was an arrest warrant out for her. If she could get it by Sunday, I think it was March 17th, 4 years ago, then she would have immunity. They would have to remove her immunity, and she'd be able to stay and campaign unless they removed her immunity. But the electoral authority didn't come out with her registration, and the next day she fled the country, because had she gone to pick up her registration, she would have been arrested. Now, this is the candidate that Arevalo, who's the guy who's the presidential candidate in the second round on the Semilla ticket, Arevalo says that he is going to consult with all of those prosecutors and judges who he claims are being persecuted that are now in the United States because they're the ones that know how to fight corruption. Well, George Orwell couldn't put it any better than that.
Yeah, and just I want to say thank you to Miner for sharing his perspective. His personal view, one of our listeners, is that the election should be repeated with new candidates. I guess the assumption there is that if the no vote or the void vote beats to the candidates, that should signal, or it should initiate a new election, that there's a rejection of the candidates.
Yeah, there are people, I've heard that discussed before. There are people that make that case, but right now it's not the law.
And Steve, for the election, you spent plenty of time, so we've had one article live from Nick Versi about what happened. You spent plenty of time examining what Guatemalans should do when approaching such an election. And you had a three-part series on the State Department. So it was called "The State Department is the Problem."
Yeah, and 4-part series.
One of you, maybe the article that caught my attention the most was "How to Spot a Puppet for U.S. Meddling in Guatemala." Now, are you willing to speak about these current runoff candidates as potential puppets?
Well, look, and forget puppets. I mean, what's worse than that is the one that I just told you about, this guy Revelo for the Sevilla party, who said he's going to bring back these former prosecutors and judges. Well, wait a minute. They have cases against them. So he's essentially saying those cases are bogus. Well, if you look at the evidence, and it's public, you can go and see the evidence. Anybody can do that. He should do that. He should go down there and see that. Or is he saying, I don't care what the evidence is. These are my people. Whatever they do is good. And anybody who says they're bad, that's a bad person. I mean, this is what's going on in the United States. This is what the Democrat Party is doing today. And so that's a dead giveaway. I mean, what I was writing about were things that people could say, like, for instance, persecution of journalism. The Jose Ruben Zamora case. Anybody who says that that's persecution of journalism is echoing the State Department line. And the reason the State Department says that is that they're hiding their own crimes, and they have to protect Zamora because, as Zamora said in court, he was working closely with them. And so they have to attack Guatemala to hide their own crimes, and the current government, that is. And so they tie themselves up with that. But if you look at the case itself, if you go and examine the evidence presented in that case, it's a straightforward criminal case, not persecution. So that's one way you can tell a State Department a puppet.
Yeah, well, so it was a 4-part series, forgive me, not a 3-part series. And you looked at the best viable non-State Department candidate, and you just said, well, there was a key point you made also about why the State Department in particular at this time is sensitive to who will be the next president. Why is it particularly the case at this time?
Because they want to hide their crimes and continue their agenda. And they commit a lot of crimes. I mean, the Engelist sanctions, as they're known here, they had to abuse U.S. law. They violated the congressional intent of the United States Congress, who created that law. And instead of making processes to choose prosecutors and judges more transparent, the State Department is the one that made them less transparent. They intervened blatantly to try to keep Consuelo Porras from being reappointed last year, and President Giammattei reappointed her, and of course that put the State Department in a difficult position. And she's been prosecuting State Department agents who've committed a lot of crimes. And as I say, the evidence is public, and there are multiple crimes with public evidence. This is not really debatable if you look at it. People want to debate it and they want to discount anything that I say or anybody who says the same kind of thing as oh, those are the rantings of right-wing lunatics, insurrectionists, racists, whatever they want to call you. And the last thing they ever want to do is look at evidence. And I always say, go to the evidence. Let's take a look at the evidence. And the only thing they could do is say, oh, this guy's corrupt, that guy's corrupt. Okay, you say somebody's corrupt. Why do you say that? What's your basis for saying that? I mean, I can provide my basis for saying they're corrupt, and I'm doing that right now. I'm saying, go look at the evidence in the cases that the State Department is claiming are persecution of anti-corruption prosecutors and judges. It's just not true.
Yeah, let me try to round off your comments there, Steve. There are particular issues that would highlight a candidate being in the State Department's pocket. So one would be going against Consuelo Portas, the Attorney General. Another would be seeking to persecute or go after retired military generals, right? Those who fought against the communists.
Well, you have to be more specific there. The point is this: just simply going after retired military general, that's not the giveaway. The giveaway is, and I mentioned in those articles, specific trials, and I mentioned 2 of them. There are plenty of them, and I know there are anomalies in all of them, but I looked at 2 of them because 2 United States ambassadors attended those trials, and the violations of the constitutional rights of those veterans is so egregious as to be sickening. It's like a Soviet show trial. And the 2 that I looked at, Zeperzarko and Molina Tayson, and the people like the Guardian and the State Department, they're gonna claim all the opposite. And so I say again, you go to the evidence, you look at the proceedings, because it's all public, and you can see the violations of law, or you can just read about it in places that will actually publish it. But what you get from Insight Crime and other biased news outlets is a partial accounting, where they might tell you something that's true, but then they leave out an important part of why that's not important, or they leave out exculpatory evidence or legal contradictions of the prosecution or violation of the rights of the accused. And so it's those specific trials that I say are a giveaway for State Department puppets.
Yeah, let's try to round off now, Steve. Is there going to be any interruption or pushback against these 2 runoff candidates, or that's just set in stone now?
I don't know. It depends on the political parties. If the political parties could challenge it and ask for a recount, who knows what the authorities would do if that happened. I personally think it's a good thing because, more information is good. You don't need debate. You don't need questioning. And so there's nothing wrong with looking at the votes themselves. I mean, let happen whatever happens. And so I doubt that that's going to happen. It's improbable, I think, that anybody's going to challenge it. Not impossible. They still have 3 days, but it's unlikely. And if they don't challenge it, then these 2 are in the runoff. And what can you say? Just hope that Guatemala lives to have a free election someday.
Well, I'll just go through a few numbers here before we finish off, because Steve, you've got a ton to say about this. Of the actual people, so 59% of people went to vote, of those registered, okay? Of the people who actually were registered and then went out to vote, 76% of them actually did vote. So let's say successfully or valid. So you had around 44% of actual voters getting a successful vote. And of those, 20% voted for Sandra Torres, or 21%. So you are talking about a very small number of people. And the fact that 17% were invalid votes and 7% were blank votes. So basically, 1/4 of the supposed votes either were blank or invalid. It's a tremendous proportion. And you've got to wonder, how on earth does that happen?
Well, it's a combination of several factors. My guess is, it is not something I wrote about. I'm just spontaneously answering your questions. My guess is that people are fed up. They're especially fed up with the corruption that they perceived in this government, the current government. And remember, this was the COVID government. And COVID governments all around the world were not particularly popular with their populations. And so I think it's a combination of that frustration and manipulation. I mean, let's put it this way. In the United States, for instance, the Democrat Party is miles ahead of the Republicans. They play chess while Republicans play checkers. And they understand, they got Marxist manipulators, and they understand human psychology and human weaknesses. And so they know how to play it. They know how to put things in social media, on regular media. They know how to spread rumors. These people are experts at that. It's the only thing they're good at. If they were as good at running a country and making everybody better off as they are of destroying it, manipulating it, well, have a different opinion of these people. But that's what I think. It's a combination of voter frustration and not a majority of them either, of voter frustration and manipulation. And I would say that manipulation is probably more than half of it, because if you compare the void and blank vote this year with 4 years ago, I'm guessing that it probably more than doubled.
Well, if you send people to the polls and almost 1 in 5 of them comes away with an invalid vote, and 1 in 4 of them didn't vote for anybody, that's a serious problem, in my opinion.
I would say that's true. But again, look at the proportions from 4 years ago and see what it was. I mean, if it was like 5% less, okay, then it's a continual thing. But if it more than doubled from 4 years ago, then you better look at manipulation, because even discontent won't explain it.
Yeah, well, the thing is, the invalid votes, I haven't seen what goes into invalid votes versus blank votes, because we have, like I said, 7% blank votes, 17% invalid votes, which suggests...
Well, Fergus, if I knew you were going to ask about this, I would have checked it out. It wouldn't have taken me very long. In less than a half an hour, I could have had all the details. But since I had no clue that we were going to be talking about this, I thought we were going to be talking about my recent articles. Then, I know. I'm offering this spontaneously, and you'd have to go back and check.
Yeah, no, I know, Steve. I didn't know about that either. I was just looking at the results and saw them there alongside the results. So I didn't expect that outcome. But so, folks, we've raced through more than half an hour. Steve, mate, maybe we'll have to do this more frequently than every month. But if you haven't already, please go to impunityobserver.com and check out our latest article, Nick Versi, and check out Steve's 4-part series, The State Department is the Problem. There's a ton of great content there. We're proud to have both Steve and Nick contributing. We thank all our listeners, and thank you to Mana Gutierrez for his comments today. Otherwise, we'll catch you next month. Cheers.